an official welcome to everyone who has joined us for this session, which is titled Exploring South Asian Collections at the University of London. And this is a session to mark South Asian Heritage Month, and it is a collaboration between librarians and archivists from Senate House Library, King's College London Archives and Special Collections, and SOAS Library. Our aim is to give you information on what we hold in our respective collections and to inspire you to do your own research on South Asia or expand the resources that you may have already available to you. We'll give you a series of introductions to each library's collections relating to South Asia, and that will be followed by a Q&A at the end. So we've got a full program listed for you here, but I just want to start with a few bits of housekeeping. You might already have noticed, but this presentation is being recorded, or the presentations will be recorded. So you should mute yourself or turn off your camera if you do not wish to feature on the recording. We won't, however, be recording the Q&A, so you'll be free to ask us any question about the intimidation of recordings afterwards. We will also answer all questions that you have for all presentations at the very end of this session, but you're very welcome to start adding questions into the chat as they occur to you at any time. So first of all, we'll proceed to our first set of presentations from Senate House Library, and just to introduce myself and my colleagues, my name is Argula Rublak, and I am the Academic Librarian for History at Senate House Library, and I'm joined by my colleagues Julio Casasa, who's the Academic Librarian for Latin American Studies and Commonwealth Studies, and Tansy Barton, who is the Print and Manuscript Studies Librarian. And to start us off swiftly, I'll hand over to Julio from here.
Oh, thank you, Argula. Today I will be introducing the Commonwealth Studies Political Parties collection in Senate House Library, with a specific focus on materials from South Asia. The collection was established in 1960-61 with a clear emphasis on collecting primary political documents, party constitutions, election manifestos, policy statements, and convention reports. Over time, it has grown to include over 10,000 items of political ephemera from across the Commonwealth. Materials were gathered mainly through direct appeals to political parties, supplemented by contributions from researchers following field visits. These documents are categorized in three main types: political parties, marked PP, pressure groups, PG, and trade unions, TU. The collection captures both national and local concerns and includes perspectives from international organizations and transnational movements such as Pan-Africanist and regional trade union groups. It is important to note that these materials often use historical or colonial place names reflecting the context and terminology of their time. Now, turning specifically to South Asia, I would like to highlight four key countries represented in this collection: Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. The collection from Bangladesh reflects the politically volatile years following its independence in 1971. It includes pamphlets, posters, manifestos, and conference reports from major political parties such as the Awami League, the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, and various socialist and communist groups. Pressure group materials, including those from the Scheduled Castes Federation and the Commission for Justice and Peace, address caste-based discrimination and inter-community violence, particularly in the early 1990s. These documents capture both ruling party narratives and dissenting voices during Bangladesh's early years as a nation. The Indian material spanned a broad political landscape, from mainstream parties such as the Indian National Congress to smaller regional and ideological groups, including the Janata Party, the Bharatiya Janata Party, and several communist factions. Much of this material covers the decades after independence, particularly the 1950s through the 1980s. Key themes include debates around secularism, no alignment, and the dominance of the Congress Party. The collection also includes pamphlets from leftist youth organizations and pressure groups tackling communalism and civil liberties, especially in the context of the 1975.
Yeah, no problem at all. I'm probably the only one in the library who's got scissors at the moment.
So sorry, I listened something there, especially in the context of the 1975 emergency. The trade union section, including documents from AITUC and INTUC, reflects the deep entwinement of labor movements with the broader independence struggle and post-colonial governance. The Pakistan sections contains documents from as early as the 1940s and spans both democratic and military regimes. Political parties such as the Pakistan Muslim League and the Pakistan People's Party are well represented, along with the smaller movements like the National Awami Party and the Pakistan Democratic Party. Many of the materials relate to periods of political unrest, including resistance to the military rule and debates surrounding the 1971 civil war that led to the formation of Bangladesh. Some documents also touch on the Kashmir conflict and include voices from the diaspora and exile organizations. Materials from Sri Lanka cover both Sinhalese and Tamil political organizations, including the United National Party, Sri Lanka Freedom Party, Tamil Congress, and various Marxist and Trotskyist groups. Key political themes include the post-independence state structure, the escalation of ethnic tensions, and the rise of Tamil militancy. Pressure group materials, especially from the 1980s onward, highlight efforts at international justice and peace building, while trade unions documents reflect the significant role of organized labor, particularly in the tea plantation sector. The collection offers insight into both the left-wing coalition of the 1970s and the deepening civil conflict that followed. In sum, the South Asian material between the Commonwealth Studies political parties collections offer a rich and varied perspective on the political evolution of the region, from post-colonial transitions to internal conflicts, party politics, labor movements, and civil society activism. Now I will hand back to Argula, who will offer some insights through selected case studies.
Okay, thank you very much. So in the second part of this presentation, we wanted to present a very brief case study on how you might use these materials to gain information for your research. As Julia mentioned, there is a wide variety of materials in the collection, but here we will focus on materials from one trade union. These are pamphlets which were collected from Bangladesh, originating from the National Garment Workers Federation. Post-independence in 1971, Bangladesh's garment industry expanded rapidly and textiles became the country's largest export product. And with the process of expanding industrial textile production, a trade union movement developed alongside it. So in 1984, the National Garment Workers Federation, or NGWF, was founded. and it's currently still the largest national trade union federation in the garment sector, with multiple branch offices and factory committees across the country. In the collection that we have here, we hold two publications from this union, one from 2001 and one from 2003. Another interesting feature of these pamphlets is that one of them still has the postage stamp from when the publication was sent to the library, and you can see that at the bottom of this slide here. This also emphasizes the somewhat sporadic nature of collecting that we're dealing with here, though. So there was a heavy reliance on close connections with parties, unions, and pressure groups who donated materials to us, and at times we may have a large volume of publications for one country or organization, but on some we may have less. So while the union was active for several decades before and after the early 2000s, the collection only has these two works. Even if the collections aren't necessarily comprehensive, much can still be glimpsed even from a small segment of the ephemera collection, such as this. So examining each pamphlet a bit more closely, we can see signs of how the expansion of the garment industry triggered political, economic, and social change in Bangladesh. The pamphlet's contents include a summary of the union's missions and goals, details on current employment conditions, information on gender representation in the sector, details of the union's education and training program, and also summaries of strike action and campaigning activities. The 2001 publication reveals a particular emphasis on the inclusion of women in training and leadership activities too. The majority of garment industry workers are women, and from the 1990s, the involvement of women became a major concern in the development of labor organizing in Bangladesh. This is because even though there were an increasing number of women employees in the garment industry, this didn't automatically translate to women's presence in the union. In response, the publication cites one of its main activities as, quote, special training and education for the women workers, end quote. And on the left of this slide here, you can see the union's training schedules or training statistics that they caught during that year, and 2 of its 5 education and training sessions are listed as aimed in particular at women in this case. And it's also accompanied by a full-page spread of photos from these events. Strike activities and campaigning causes take up the majority of the rest of the publication, and discusses a sense of the wide-ranging concerns around improvement of workers' rights present in the society at the time, including calls for increased wages, festival and holiday allowances, and workers' health and safety, amongst other matters. Just to finish off this segment, I would like to point you to how you can also analyze these materials from an international and comparative lens. So the 2001 publication we just looked at dedicates a full page to Bangladesh's heavy reliance on the US as an export market and the effects of import duties and quotas which they experienced on their employment in the garment sector during that same year. So this just led me personally to look across the pamphlet and ephemera collections to see if there were other materials from around this time discussing similar issues. And indeed, we can see that the discussion about the effects of a globalized economy across South Asia and other regions of the world is present in other publications that we collected. And an example I have of this is on the middle and right of the slide here. This is a copy that we also hold in the collection of Garment Workers' Voice, produced by Transnational Information Exchange Asia in the year 2000, which discusses the garment industry in Bangladesh as well as Sri Lanka. Interestingly, however, these were collected not as part of the materials on South Asia, so they're not listed under a particular country, but they're part of a segment of the collections on international organizations and trade unions. So no matter what you are researching, to expand your search within the ephemera and pamphlet collection we just introduced, it's also worth thinking beyond national and regional boundaries to gain some additional information. So that's just a really quick, short case study, and now I will hand over to my colleague Tansy for the next part of the presentation.
Thank you, Argula. So I'm going to be looking at something very different to the previous collections we were looking at from the library, and that is South Asian magic in one of our named special collections, the Harry Price Library of Magical Literature. And this is in part inspired by the project of the first research fellow at the library from 2019, Dr. Sugata Nandi, who looked at the globalization of Indian magic in the collection. So the Harry Price Library, to give you a brief introduction, is a collection created by a man called Harry Price. He was active in psychical research, ghost hunting, testing mediums, investigating unexplained phenomena in the 1920s and 1930s. And he built up a very extensive library of material covering all subjects to do with the paranormal, the occult, magic, and the unexplained, and also within that stage magic. And that's what I'm going to be particularly looking at today. The collection includes a wide range of formats, and most of the material that you can find in the collection on South Asian magic mostly comes from the kind of non-traditional print formats, so cut-ins, off-print, scrapbooks, pamphlets, and other materials within the archive as well as the library collection. The collection includes, as I mentioned, as well as the library, Price's correspondence, his working papers, and that includes what I'll come on to at the end, an example of his investigations in the 1930s into phenomena like firewalking and the Indian rope trick. So what I'm covering today is looking at magic in terms of conjuring, in terms of what's sometimes called secular magic or illusory magic. So not effective magic or magic that's associated with ritual or religious aspects of magic, although there is, of course, quite often some overlap between the two. And the material within the collection does all come mostly from a Western colonial perspective, and obviously reflects the language at the time it was produced in the 19th and early 20th century. Although there is some traces of publications by Indian magicians and also of their activity when performing and touring in Europe and North America. So a bit of background, of course, magic was a big tradition in India for thousands of years before Indian jugglers, as they were called at the time, started to appear on English stages in the late 18th and early 19th century. And there was this growing in the 19th century, a big fascination in Britain and the West more generally with India as the cradle of magic, and this came with a lot of exoticism and coming from a lot of travel accounts which greatly exaggerated what Indian performers are doing. But the earliest items that we have in the collection come from the early 19th century, from scrapbooks of cut-ins of advertisements and listings of the performances of magicians in a lot of different places, and it includes some records of Indian performers performing in the early 19th century in various theatres and performance spaces, mostly in London, but also across the country. And they were described as jugglers. This was a common name for entertainers using sleight of hand or performing illusion and other magic tricks, rather than, strictly speaking, just doing juggling with balls or other equipment. And among the cut-ins that you can see here is a playbill featuring one of the most renowned performers of this period, Ramo Sami, who he toured in Britain and Europe and North America in the first 2 decades of the 19th century. And the playbill here has him performing in an early form of variety entertainments, and it promises that he will be appearing in full costume of his country, performing feats involving golden balls, knives, pigeons shot with a magic gun, a grand Eastern canopy, and a Hindu top. And from this very early period, and even before performers started travelling to the UK, Indian magic held a very strong influence over the West, both from these, as I say, these accounts of travellers and the performers when they started to travel to the UK, and this led to Western performers, particularly in the latter half of the 19th century, appropriating Indian personas and names, in particular stage dressings, and also taking tricks that originated in South Asia and representing them as kind of new tricks appearing on Western stages. And this is where there is a wealth of material in the collection that you can find traces of this appropriation. So we have here a playbill for Kia Khan Cruz, who was a contemporary of Ramasamy, and was probably not actually an Indian performer, but someone possibly Portuguese who'd taken on an Indian name because of the popularity of Indian performers at the time. And Kia Khan Cruz and Ramasamy possibly inspired Charles Dickens to create his own Indian conjurer persona, which he once performed at a house party under the name Ria Ramruz. But then moving on to tricks which were actually kind of taken into Western repertoires, particularly in the later part of the 19th century. One of the biggest influences on this was the man known as the father of modern magic in the West, Robert Houdin, who was a French magician. And you can see here a playbill, and the detail features an image of his suspension ethereal. And this was a version of a very common Indian trick where the performer appears to float supported by a very slender pole or other support. And this was explained in a book called Modern Magic by Professor Hoffman, which was first published in 1872 and described as an Indian trick, but one that Robert Houdin had found the secrets of the fakirs, it's the way it explains it, to perform his own version. And you can see in the book Modern Magic, it's revealed how the trick was performed. And the next one we have here is an example of another very popular illusion from the end of the 19th century, which was known as the Indian basket trick. And this was popularized in the West by a performer called Colonel Stodare, who's in the engraving here. And he was it was attributed to him, but it was a very common performance among Indian street performers. And next to it is an image of an Indian performer who was working mostly in the first 2 decades of the 20th century, Prince Ismail, performing the trick. And this is from a 1902 article in the Pictorial Press. And most of the sources in the collection that you can find on Indian magicians do come from these kind of popular press articles. Perhaps one of the most renowned tricks to have come from India into the Western repertoire was the Indian rope trick, and there was something of a craze around this in the early 20th century based on descriptions of visitors who'd witnessed it in India, and it brought up this big debate about the true nature of the trick, whether it was something that was simply an illusion, whether it was performed via hypnosis, was it actual supernatural abilities involved, or were the accounts of observers simply exaggerated? And most magicians incorporated a version, because of its popularity, of the Indian rope trick into their performances. And here you can see the American magician Howard Thurston, with his version on a playbill with a lot of Indian set dressing involved. But you can also find in the collection traces of Indian and South Asian musicians starting to perform in Western stages during the golden age of magic in the late 19th and early 20th century, particularly through the extensive collection of periodicals. The collection includes specialist magazines on magic, but also more generally in historical newspapers and magazines that you can access through other resources in the library. And here we have 3 Indian magicians featured. There is Naha Alvaro, who also performed as Professor Alvaro, exposing the tricks of Indian fakirs in the Magician's Annual in 1908. Next to that is Natu Manchachand, who was one of the first kind of cover stars of a magic magazine from India in the West. And he's particularly praised in this article for wanting to follow the Western style of magic rather than what was being done in India at the time. And finally, here we have Ayan Dutt, who performed under a couple of different names and had a very eventful life, including being part of a revolutionary organisation, using his firework skills to make bombs with the aim of bringing down the British government. But he later launched his career as a magician, initially under the name Ram Bhuj, and then more successfully as Linga Singh, the Royal Hindu illusionist. And he toured extensively through Europe and Britain. And when he died in 1937, he insisted on all his props being burnt, which were worth a considerable amount of money, but likely to preserve the secrets of his performances. So the last example is a little bit different, and in that it goes into the overlap between secular magic and religious rituals and practices. But it picks up a lot of the themes that run through the fascination of the British with the kind of the idea of the mysterious East and the wonders of South Asia, and the abilities of what were commonly called fakirs and holy men. And this performer who's pictured here was a man named Khuda Baksh, who was born in Kashmir in 1905. He also performed under the name Professor K.B. Duke. And he, like many, learned magic at a young age. And he came to London in 1935. And Harry Price was very keen to meet with him because, as well as being a skilled magician, he also claimed to have abilities which fell more into the realm of the kind of the investigation of supernormal phenomena and psychic ability. So the first test that Price was keen to carry out with Khuda Baksh was of his eyeless sight, and you'll see in this picture here his head is bandaged, and he claimed to be able to read with his eyes completely bandaged. He said he could do it via his nostrils, so his face wasn't completely obscured. He couldn't read a book, say, that was under a cover or in a box, but this was one of the phenomena that Harry Price tested with him, and it also gave him the name the man with the X-ray eyes. The other phenomena that Baksh claimed to be able to perform was firewalking. And I'll just show you a quick clip. This is a video we have, a film we have in the collection that Price shot of his experiments with Khuda Baksh performing firewalking in 1935. You can find the full film on our YouTube channel, but we're a little bit behind time, so I'll just rush through it. And this was something that Price was particularly interested in the 1930s, and he wanted to test what kind of how someone could actually do this without their feet being burned. So they did some experiments with Khuda Baksh and kind of came to the conclusion that he was performing the firewalk in a kind of semi-hypnotic state, and the explanations they gave for him being able to do it without being burned were kind of down to one theory was it was to do with an obscure relationship between physical and mental forces that made him immune. But more plausible was that it was down to the technique he used of how he placed his feet when actually walking across the coals. That was a very quick run through some of the magic we have in the collection, the Harry Price Library from South Asia. If you're interested in exploring the subject more deeply, there are some books here which are useful starting points, but also for all of the collections we've been talking about today, some e-resources that you can access within the library. The pamphlets that Julio and Argula talked about are digitised on a collection called Decolonisation, Politics and Independence in Formal, Colonial and Commonwealth Territories, and you can access that in the library. A couple of other resources for magic that we have available: Victorian Popular Culture. It features a lot of material digitised from the Harry Price Library and other collections. And then we have some databases here of historical newspapers and magazines, which can be very useful resources for tracing the careers of magicians and their performances. So finally, to give you a bit of information about how you can actually access our collection. You can explore the collections via the library catalogue, and the best way to access that is to go to the library homepage, and the address is just at the bottom of the screen here. We've just moved to a new catalogue, so it's a little bit still settling. So if there's things you're looking for and you can't find, you're always welcome to contact us to ask for assistance. All the material we've talked about today is in our special collections and archives, and they are free to access by prior arrangement. We also have other membership schemes available under which you can access the library. The special collections can only be used in the special collections reading room, but we do also have a virtual reading room if you can't come to the library in person, and you can make an appointment for that on the library website. Special collections requests need to be placed a few days in advance, and you can either do that via the catalogue or by emailing the special collections team. And e-resources and e-books, so the resources I mentioned in the previous slide, those can all be accessed on site via the library's Wi-Fi network. So finally, just to say, if you do have any questions, you're very welcome to ask at the end of the session or post them in the chat, or you can contact us, and our contact details are there along with the special collections service contact. Thank you. And we're now handing over to our colleagues at King's.
Welcome to King's. This is us. Sorry. And it will be in a minute. Bear with us. I'm Kate O'Brien, Archives Collections Manager. We actually hold two separate collections, the College Archives and the Little Heart Centre for Military Archives. I'm going to talk to you about just two items from the many collections here that relate to the British experience of South Asia. Please be aware that these are very specific points of view. This is a small selection from an extraordinary photo album, Brigadier General Charles Fuchs.
That's not our collection,
I'll carry on. There's a content warning here. It was created in a violent context. I'm going to tell you a bit about that. I'm not going to talk about each photo, don't worry. Chemical weapons expert Charles Fuchs was sent to Northwest Frontier Province in 1919 during the Third Anglo-Afghan War to investigate the possibility of using gas against Afghan forces. A few months earlier, British commanded Indian Army troops had killed many hundreds of unarmed civilians at Amritsar. Fuchs's attempts to convince the Viceroy of India that gas would be an effective weapon were unsuccessful. Worldwide repugnance for chemical warfare and the volatile situation in India meant that his mission was also kept secret for many years. The British didn't want it known that they had considered using gas, which was banned a few years later under the Geneva Protocol in 1925. This is the Golden Temple at Amritsar, and this is the site of the massacre, ambiguously captioned by Fuchs as the site of General Dyer's action. But I want to leave this album with some of the more positive images of everyday existence. second item is this scrapbook album, Lucky Chance Survival. Colonel John Hurd bought it second hand, and we don't know when or where. It was created from 1901 to 1903 by Beryl White, daughter of John Claude White, who was the British political officer in the small northeast Indian state of Sikkim. That's Beryl in the round photo on the right in the hat. She painted watercolours, took photographs and collected menus, press cuttings and signatures that all reflect her upper middle class English existence in India. These tiny sketches are by family friend Charles Waddington. Here's John Claude White in the hat. And on the left, by the way, is the house he had built, which still stands, and it's nowadays the official residence of the governor of Sikkim. I just love this album. It's probably the most beautiful thing we've got in the whole of the military archives. Now, over to Claire.
Sorry, that's it. Right, thanks very much, Kate. So I'm Claire Stevens and I'm the Archive Services Manager here at KCL. So I'm going to introduce two stories and an object from the College Archives, which is our institutional collection. So King's, like all the other universities here, has very notable alumni, and we hold collections of personal papers for a small number of these. But others are only represented in the collections by maybe an entrance paper or their name on the college calendar, but their stories are central to the history of the college, and their lives will have been influenced by their time spent at King's. So the first person I'd like to mention is Dr. Gottlieb Wilhelm Leitner, a Victorian Orientalist and educator who was both a student and a professor at King's. So Gottlieb was something of a child prodigy. At the age of 8 in Constantinople, he became fluent in Turkish and Arabic, and his stepfather nurtured his appetite for learning. When he was 15, he was appointed as interpreter to the British Commissariat in the Crimea, and he had the rank of colonel. So one of the first things that we have from Leitner is his correspondence. In 1858, in August, King's receives a letter recommending Gottlieb and enclosing a letter from him. Now, Gottlieb is not a shy chap, and he promotes himself endlessly. He says that he can speak 8 languages already. He's very keen on languages being taught at King's more widely. He has a very strong understanding and a sense that as far as the empire goes, natives are responsible for the translation and cannot always be trusted. He suggests that a chair of Turkish and Arabic should be appointed, and a few months later actually sends a letter saying that he should be the person for the job. So the next item that we have for him is his entrance paper from 1859. Now, he, at this stage, is wondering whether he wants to become a priest. He says in his letter that he hopes he'll have a calling at some point, but you can see on the left the subjects that he studies, and they include divinity. Now, Gottlieb is actually listened to, and somehow in 1861, he is appointed as professor in Arabic and Muslim law here at KCL. Now, he goes on to do some amazing things after he leaves King's, but he very much shapes the teaching of languages at King's, particularly Oriental studies and the languages contained within that. Another thing that he's very passionate about is the subjects to be included in the Civil Service of India exams. After the abolition of the East India Company, when the monarchy took on government of India, King's became one of the institutions that administered the Civil Service of India exams. So after he left reached King's, Leitner travelled extensively throughout Central Asia. He's one of the first recorded Europeans to travel to certain areas of northern India. He's an expert on Kashmir. We don't have a lot of visual material that directly relates to Leitner, but we do have amazing maps. And we also have collections of photographs, largely from the military, that show the areas that Gottlieb travelled to. So this is a photograph of Gilgit-Baltistan, one of the areas that he went to. And on the right is Gottlieb dressed in traditional costume. He very much tried to integrate, but obviously these days that does kind of come over as cultural appropriation. But he is very, very positive. He's definitely a multiculturalist. He became principal of the government college at Lahore in 1863, and a little later he campaigned for funding and was one of the people responsible for setting up the University of the Punjab and became the first registrar there. When he returned to England, he wanted to set up an institute in Woking, which was to be the Oriental Institute, which he founded in 1883. And it was a centre for the study of the culture and history of India and the Islamic world. His vision was to have a university which included a synagogue, a mosque, and a church. And in 1889, the Shah Jahan Mosque was built in Woking, and that is Northern Europe's first purpose-built mosque. Now, it was intended for the students attending the Oriental Institute, and sadly, Gottlieb died before he could see the rest of his project fruition. The next person I'm going to talk about is Sarojini Naidu. Now, Sarojini was a celebrated poet, women's rights activist, politician, and freedom fighter. Coincidentally, she was also a child prodigy. She came to England on a scholarship aged 16 and joined King's College Ladies Department. The Ladies Department didn't award degrees, but the principal at the time was Lillian Faithfull, and she was committed to ensuring that the students were taught at degree level, even if they couldn't obtain the end qualification. So the first record we have for Sarojini, and this is just very lucky that we have her listed in the address book and courses. This actually tells her when she joined King's. It says that she was studying English history and English literature, and the name list given in red italics there next to English literature is Edmund Gosse, who was a celebrated poet himself and was extremely influential on Sarojini. So although she's studying English history, when we look at the college calendar of the period, we can see that the notion of English history is actually imperial history. And what she's studying is the conquest of India. And one particular thing is early trade with India, the Black Hole of Calcutta, the Battle of Plassey and Clive. So this is a point where Sarojini really becomes aware of the injustices of the empire. In 1926, there's an article printed in The Guardian, which is by Arthur Symons, who remembers meeting her as a student. And he says he met her at the house of Edmund Gosse, who is now Sir Edmund Gosse. She was 17. She had in her all the wild magic of the East. Her eyes were deep like pools, and you seemed to fall through them into depths below depths. So she's very much exoticized by the older men who are with her, but he does recognize that she was like an awakening soul, to use one of her own epithets. And this is when she becomes politically aware and also imbued with the influences of the significant poets that she's working with. So we're really lucky because some of her work was published in the King's College magazine for the ladies department. So we have 3 examples of her poems, which are here if you want to look through them. Obviously, you're very welcome to come in to look at the magazines and read them yourselves. The final communication she has that we have record of with kings is a birth notice of the birth of her first son in 1899. And by that stage, she's listed as Sarojini, the wife of Dr. Naidu. When she goes back to India after she's left King's, I'm not going to read out this whole list of everything she does, but she is an incredible woman. And I'm sorry, I'm just turning to my page. So she met Gandhi in London in 1914, and they formed a lifelong friendship and obviously very close political alliance as well. And Gandhi was one of her greatest influences. They developed a lifelong friendship, and she was with him on the Salt March in 1930, which is a non-violent act of resistance against the British salt monopoly. When Gandhi was arrested on the 6th of April that year, he appointed Naidu as the new leader of the campaign. And this is Gandhi and Naidu together. And he called her the Nightingale of India because of her poetry. And she called him Mickey Mouse, apparently, which were their very affectionate nicknames for each other. There's an awful lot to read about Naidu. She really is an extraordinary woman. And I wish we had more directly relating to her, but she's a very key person in our King's history. So the final thing that I'm going to talk about is a Tamil palm leaf manuscript. Now, this has been with us for nearly a century, I think, but it's not something that we have a lot of information. We know it came to us as part of the Marsden collection, which you're going to hear a lot more about. Palm leaf manuscripts are a traditional form of document. They're written on dried palm leaves, the Palmyra palm, and absolutely minute writing. They often relate to medicine or literature. Unfortunately, we have no idea of the subject of this one, but there's a huge program of digitization with these. So that's something that we're going to be looking into, and we hope to make the information available. And you're going to be hearing a lot about Marsden from our colleagues in Special Collections. So that's the end of our archives presentation, and here's some details. We're located at the Strand building of King's College. We're open Tuesdays, Wednesdays and Thursdays by appointment, and do either scan the QR code or email archives@kcl.ac.uk. And now I'll stop sharing and hand over to our colleagues in Special Collections.
Thank you very much, Claire. Hello, everybody. My name's Katie Sandbrook. I'm Head of Special Collections and Engagement at King's College London. And I'm now going to introduce you briefly to some highlights from our other heritage collections here at King's, which are the rare books, manuscripts and other material housed in the Foyle Special Collections Library. We hold over 240,000 items in our special collections, but I'm going to focus on just two collections, which are different in size, in content, and in origins, but similar in the fact that, like the collections we've just been hearing about from Kate and Claire, they derive largely from the British interaction with South Asia. Next slide. So you've heard the name William Marsden mentioned, and the first collection I'm going to talk about is the Library of William Marsden, who you see pictured here in his old age. Marsden, who lived from 1754 to 1836, worked for the East India Company in Asia, and then returned to London, where he worked as a civil servant and rose to become first secretary to the Admiralty at the time of Trafalgar. Marsden's real interest, however, was languages. He was a great linguistic scholar and collector, and he built up a library of around 3,000 rare books and manuscripts. Now, this was a collection specifically designed to support his study of the world's languages, and particularly those of Asia. The collection is shared now between King's and SOAS, and I think we may hear a bit about the SOAS component a bit later. And King's holds around 2/3 of Marsden's library. Now, Marsden was a real collector, and he hunted out rarities such as the book you see in the bottom left image. This is a copy of the 1715 Tamil New Testament, which is the first translation of the Bible into a South Asian language to be printed. Copies of this book are extremely rare. Not many were printed in the first place, as the printer, Johann Adler, was desperately short of type. He resorted to melting down the metal lids of cheese boxes to recycle as type metal. Our copy was presented by one of the two translators, Bartholomeus Ziegenbalg, to Joseph Collett, who later was governor of Madras, and it's bound in beautiful dark blue velvet. Marsden also collected travel books, such as the 1819 account of Afghanistan with coloured plates, which you can see bottom right, dictionaries, phrase books, anything in fact which contained information about a country's languages, such as the manuscript top right, which is a dictionary of the Konkani language of Goa, compiled in the 1620s by Portuguese Jesuits. Next slide, please. Now, Marsden gave his collection to King's in 1835, which makes it one of our foundation collections. But the second collection I'm going to talk about is a much more recent acquisition. The UK Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, or FCDO, is a government department, and it had built up an enormous historical library collection over the past 250 years, when in 2007, the FCDO approached King's and asked us if we might be interested in taking on this collection. Well, we had to think a bit, because where would we immediately fit 100,000 volumes? But in fact, we didn't take long to make a decision. We were delighted to take on this collection. It's a unique resource for the study of world history. One caveat, though, I need to make clear what this collection is not. You will know that it was the India Office, a separate arm of the British government, which dealt with the present-day countries of India, Pakistan and Bangladesh during the period of British rule. And the library and records of the India Office are now held at the British Library. So in fact, the FCDO collection, which we hold at King's, is comparatively weak on coverage of India, Pakistan and Bangladesh in their pre-1947 history. Next slide, please. It does, however, contain very rich historical holdings on Sri Lanka, its history, its flora, its fauna. On the left bottom image, you can see a hand-coloured plate from a beautifully illustrated 1841 study of marine life, and its peoples and society. The image at the top left, printed on a talipot palm leaf, is from a comprehensive guide to the island, its peoples, its societies, produced in 1859 by Alistair Mackenzie, who edited the Colombo newspaper, the Ceylon Observer. The collection also contains some very interesting and rare material documenting emigration from South Asia to other parts of the then British Empire during the 19th century, South Africa, East Africa, and the Caribbean. So in the images, you can see on the bottom right, a gentleman there is an Indian immigrant to Trinidad in the 1880s, by which time there were over 67,000 people of South Asian descent living in Trinidad. And the table at the top right is from a detailed demographic study made of South Asian emigration in 1893. This table gives a breakdown of the occupations held by second-generation South Asian immigrants to Trinidad at that date. Next slide, please. After Indian independence in 1947, the India Office was wound down, so the FCDO assumed responsibility for the UK's relations with the present-day countries of India, Pakistan, and later Bangladesh. And this is reflected in the FCDO collection, not least in the huge number of pamphlets on political, economic and social themes, some examples of which you can see in this montage of covers. So after this brief romp through our special collections, I will hand over to my colleague Will Wood, who will give you some further information about our library.
Hi everyone. As I'm sharing the screens and changing the slides, I can't actually turn my camera on without maybe losing that. So I'll just speak to you very briefly before passing on to our colleagues at SOAS about how you can visit us. We're located at the Morn Library on Chancery Lane, just off Fleet Street. We are open to the public and you can contact us via email. You can also scan this QR code to learn a little bit more about our varied collections via our website. If you book your visit with us, we prefer that you do that a little bit in advance so that we can fetch material for you ahead of your arrival. And you can search our online catalogues on the KCL library search page and limit your search using the advanced search filters for our specific collections from there. Secondly, if you haven't already visited, I urge you to visit and explore what has been our most popular exhibition to date, From Streets to the Stars, 500 Years of Maps, which is ending on the 28th of September. This exhibition explores how the Earth, oceans, stars, cities and borders have been mapped since the advent of the printed book in the 15th century. A number of the regions that we've discussed today are featured in a few of the maps that we have on display here. This exhibition is free and open daily, 10 until 5. I'll pass it over now, because I'm conscious of time, to our colleagues at SOAS to discuss their fabulous manuscripts collection.
Hello, right, so I'll share my screen. Hopefully you can all see that there. So thank you very much, Will, and thank you as well to colleagues at Senate House Library for organising this event and for inviting myself and my colleagues at SOAS to contribute. So I'm Alex Kither, I'm Curator of Rare Books and Manuscripts at SOAS Library, and I'm joined today by my colleagues Ross Melvin, who is Manuscript Project Officer, and Berzine Wagner, who is Subject Librarian for South Asia. And we're going to briefly cover some of the South Asian collections here at SOAS. Myself and Ross will be looking at the archives and manuscripts that we hold in our special collections, and towards the end, Berzine will speak a little bit about the collections, the published collections that we found within the main library. To provide a bit of context, so SOAS was founded at the beginning of the 20th century, primarily with the aim of instructing colonial bureaucrats in languages of the British Empire. Over the decades, its purpose and focus has changed, and originally started focusing on Asian languages, but expanded later to African languages as well. But as a consequence of its formation and the history of the institution, much of our collections, particularly our special collections, have a large amount of South Asian materials in various different forms from various different periods of history in the regions as well. So hopefully we'll cover a few of the main areas in the collection today, as well as providing a general overview. So like I say, South Asian material forms a substantial portion of our collections here. Looking at our manuscripts specifically, the language breakdown, we have sort of roughly 160 or so Sanskrit manuscripts, 130 Sinhalese manuscripts, 140 Pali manuscripts, those are mostly Buddhist texts, as well as significant collections of both Tibetan and Nawari manuscripts, and then some small but significant collections in smaller, more obscure languages such as Limbu, Pashto, and Lepcha as well, which I've listed there. In terms of our archival holdings, the school holds several large archives recalling the British interaction with the subcontinent, primarily concentrated on the 18th and 19th centuries. And these are, again, primarily missionary societies, Christian aid organizations, and corporate archives, as well as personal papers that we hold of researchers, travelers, artists, bureaucrats who are working in and around those regions. In addition to what we consider sort of classical Southern Asian languages, the school also has rich holdings in Persian materials from the subcontinent. So among our collections, again, Persian language materials are probably some of the largest, at least in the, or largest represented in the manuscripts collection. And many of these have problems connecting them to South Asia. We also hold roughly 20 or so Urdu manuscripts, as well as some Kashmiri manuscripts in the collection as well. So in terms of how to access at least special collections material, all of our collections are available to consult in the Special Collections Reading Room, which is on level F of the main library building in Bloomsbury. We're open Tuesday to Friday, 10 till 4, and everything's by appointment. So you can apply for a reader's pass, which is free to use special collections, then make a booking online via our website and request specific material that you would like to see when you find the references in our catalogues. All of the information about booking at Special Collections can be found at the link I've provided there, and you can also email us. I've provided all the emails for myself and my colleagues. I'll share the inbox at the end of this as well if you want to take a note of it when we get there. So I'll start by giving an overview of some of our archival collections, and then we'll move on to our manuscript collections. So as I mentioned, our archival holding can be broken down to some main areas. Again, one of our strengths are our missionary collections. We also have a number of personal papers of people who are working predominantly in South Asian regions. We have a number of important oral archives relating to specifically India, British India, and all of our archival holdings that I mentioned today are catalogued online on our archives, catalogue at archives.soas.ac.uk. You'll see here, this is just an overview from our archives catalogue, which can be searched by region as well. So if you follow the link down below there or navigate it on the web page, you'll be able to see all of our materials, archival materials related to South Asia, aggregated together in the archive catalogue. And as I said again there as well, many have already been digitized, and I'll speak a little bit more about our digitization later on as well. So regarding our missionary and aid organization archives, we have, I mean, some of our largest collections are missionary archives. So the London Missionary Society, now the Council for World Mission archive, is held here, and probably our largest single archival collection, as well as the Methodist Missionary Society, another very large non-conformist missionary society collection held here at SOAS. These collections largely span the 19th century, a little bit earlier, and also a little bit into the 20th century, and includes lots of correspondence and papers around missionaries who were operating in around regions in Southern Asia. So this is a very useful resource for understanding the British interaction with South Asia, as has already been described by colleagues in other collections. And also speaking of Christian aid organisations, of which we have many archives of Christian aid organisations, one to notice specifically is the Interserve archive, formerly the Calcutta Normal School, which went through various iterations over its history, and relates to Christian educational activity, primarily in India. We also have, as I mentioned, a large number of personal papers, and I think for the regions discussed today, our linguistic and anthropological research material is probably strongest. Two collections that I picked out here are the papers of Professor Christoph von Führer-Heimendorf, who did work at SOAS for a period, and we have his papers, notebooks, slides, photographic material and film relating to the anthropological research that he and his team undertook across India, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Tibet, and the Philippines, including also his work in Nagaland as well. A large portion of this, including a lot of the visual material, has been digitized and is available to see online. Also, there has been quite a bit published on the visual material, which can be seen, but it is a sizable collection, and it includes a huge amount of details. Also, I've listed here the Lorimer papers, so the papers of Lieutenant Colonel David Lockhart Robson Lorimer, and these are his linguistic papers, again relating to various languages and regions across Southern Asia. Again, this has a large visual component, so a collection of photographs, glass negatives, and cine film of field trips from the 1930s as well. And you can see here to the side some of Lorimer's material, which he conveniently put in cigar boxes whilst he was in the field, which they still have this inside. I mean, the boxes are inside estuary boxes, but we've obviously kept the original cigar boxes that Lorimer used. And then finally, the oral histories that I referred to. So we have two significant oral history collections which relate specifically to British India and British interaction in India as well. The first being British in India Oral Archive Project, which was undertaken in the 1970s and consisted of just over 60 oral interviews with various Indian and British individuals, including some political figures and social figures as well, about their experiences, recollections, and so forth. And then the second comprises of over 200 interviews, which were conducted by Andrew Whitehead as part of research for BBC World Service series and later a BBC Radio 4 programme as well. And eventually Whitehead also published based on these interviews. So we hold the recordings and transcripts of all of these, and this latter collection as well is available digitally online, so it can be accessed online freely when it comes to viewing homes. So that was a very brief overview of the archival collections. Moving on to the manuscript collections, I'll speak a little bit about our palm leaves, and I'll pass over to my colleague Ross to speak about some of the other areas of our collections. But you've already seen an example of the Tamil palm leaf manuscript from the Marsden collection at King's. We have many other palm leaf manuscripts in our collection, just over 400, not all of which are Southern Asian. Some of them are from Southeast Asia. We have quite a few Burmese, but definitely the majority of them are from Southern India and Sri Lanka, including some in Tamil. You'll see the top here is an astrological text in Tamil. So the major languages that are represented among this collection are Sinhalese and Pali, and in terms of subject, a lot of our collections are Buddhist and religious literature. But minor languages also in the collection include Tamil, Telugu, and Malayalam, among others. They're not all religious texts, so I've got, here you can see an astrological text, but also we have dramatic works, poetic works, a number of medical texts, and various other works. Typically, those are in sort of, South Asian languages, others that have a great variety of subjects in our collection. And we'll come on to Marsden as well, because as we alluded to in the previous talk, the Marsden collection is split between ourselves, King's, and SEAS, the School of East and European Studies. And so many of the items that we received from Marsden were South Asian as well, which my colleague Ross will speak to a bit more in a minute. But also on the palm leaf manuscripts, we're currently undertaking quite a large project with our entire manuscript, palm leaf manuscript collection, which will involve the digitization and conservation of all of our manuscripts, as well as the enhanced cataloguing of those manuscripts. And that will include transcribing incipits and colophons from the manuscripts in various languages and scripts that they are in. So this is currently work that's being undertaken. You can see there my colleague Maria digitizing one of the palm leaf manuscripts. And we hope that by summer 2026, a large portion of this work will be available via the SOAS digital library, and there will be communications about that as the project progresses for any of those who are interested. But I will now pass over to my colleague Ross, who will talk you through a few other areas of the manuscripts.
Thanks very much, Alex. Just another quick note on Marsden, then I'm aware we're a little behind time. Marsden's collection is probably the major constitutive source of our entire manuscript holdings. And in addition to the rare books, which we received, around 150 of his manuscripts found their way into the SOAS library shortly after the school's foundation. Though of course Marsden's probably best known for his Southeast Asian connections and collecting, Marsden collection contains a very significant amount of South Asian or South Asia connected material as well. Marsden manuscripts are present in various South Asian languages: Bengali, Kannada, Konkani, Marathi, Tamil, and Telugu amongst them. But as noted earlier, as well as these sort of typically South Asian languages, as you might say, there's also quite a lot of Persianate material with direct connections to the subcontinent. So, for example, foremost amongst them are a group of Persian manuscripts produced by the Jesuits for the Mughal court. And this material is a particularly interesting part of Marsden's collection, which is drawn from material acquired from the Jesuit libraries in Goa upon their dissolution in the 18th century. This material from the Marsden collection, which is drawn so directly from the Mughal, imperial milieu, is complemented by various other things that SOAS holds. For example, this copy of Kashifi's Anwari Suhaili. Its colophon, as I say, dates it very precisely to 1570, and it was almost certainly a royal commission for the Emperor Akbar himself, so makes it one of the earliest paintings connected with Akbar's artistic patronage, and is of central importance to understanding the various phases of that artistic patronage and how it developed. This particular copy was donated in the early 1920s by Louisa Ousley, who was the daughter of Joseph Ousley, her father being from the famous family of Orientalists, William and Gore being the more famous half-brothers of Joseph. Himself a professor of Arabic and Persian. Part of the reason he seems to have acquired the manuscript was because he was sort of preparing for publication the original Persian text. Okay. So in terms of our manuscripts, I'd just like to make a little note on some of the key bequests and the way in which the collection came to be built up. So, as has been a sort of common theme through lots of the presentations today, the period of the sort of high noon of empire, if you could call it that, from 1917 to just following independence, formed really the bulk of SOAS's manuscript holdings. Excluding Marsden, the two largest bequests that we received were by exact contemporaries with direct and extensive contact with the subcontinent. And again, to repeat another theme which has emerged throughout this afternoon, they have particularly strong connections to the northwestern provinces. And it's this kind of collection strength in the northwestern province, material as well as material connected to Kashmir. It's enhanced by various smaller bequests from famous figures like Aurel Stein, as well as by the aforementioned archival collections of Lorimer and others. So the sort of second largest bequest, excluding Marsden, is a man called Douglas Craven Phillott, who was a sort of soldier, bureaucrat, administrator, scholar, linguist, a man with very broad-ranging connections to the subcontinent and interests. His collection is particularly strong. It's about 58 manuscripts in total, and it's particularly strong in Indo-Persian material, as he was resident in both Persia and British India at various different times, alongside seeing action in the northwestern provinces, as well as various other locales in the north of India, including Calcutta. Indeed, 7 of the sort of what might seem to be Persian, sort of boldly Persian manuscripts have details or scribal hands which sort of betray a northwest Indian origin for them. And I've displayed on the right here a particular highlight, another manuscript produced by the Royal Atelier of Emperor Akbar, in this case an illustration of Nizami Sharafnameh, which was produced somewhat later than the Suhaili, and sort of charts another moment in that development of artistic patronage that I mentioned earlier. Phillott was a man of very particular interests, and various of the manuscript materials we have a real focus on horses and birds, right? So this sort of focus on falconry and farriery in the South Asian context reflects Phillott's sort of particular tastes as a collector, as he was himself an amateur falconer and horseman, and that clearly influenced the sort of bent of his collecting activities to some extent. There are various cases where a text that is exceptionally rare is extant in a few different versions. For example, in the case of this Urdu work on rearing and training birds. And just as a sort of insight into the way in which his collecting activities worked when pursuing these interests. In cases when Philip was unable to find the original, he had a sort of network of scribes that he would call upon to produce copies of manuscripts, which he was aware of in princely libraries or museums, and he would sort of use his connections within the imperial sphere to allow this sort of copying procedure to take place. One scribe I'm particularly fond of that he used on a few occasions often provides these kind of quite lively and interesting miniatures alongside his copying. Yeah. And then the final collection that I'd like to address, and possibly the largest of all the bequests to SOAS's manuscript sequence, is the bequest of one Duncan Dunbar Dixon. This bequest, which is over 200 manuscripts strong, forms almost a tenth of the entire collection of manuscripts at SOAS. Dixon himself is slightly more mysterious than the other two figures. We know that he was born into a globally connected dynasty of Ceylon tea planters and had connections at the highest level and with various sort of shipping magnates, which enabled him to travel very widely over all of the areas that Britain held influence. But he certainly seems to have been resident in Kashmir for some length of time, and this is signalled particularly strongly by the common occurrence of these wonderful Kashmiri lacquerware bindings on his manuscripts. The collection itself contains very large quantities of Sanskrit manuscripts, many of which pertain to specifically Kashmiri forms of Shaivist devotion, as well as Kashmiri, Punjabi, and Hindi language texts more broadly. His collecting network, interestingly, seems to have involved various prominent Kashmiri pandits, and the collection evinces a strong interest in this sort of intercultural encounter that was taking place in Kashmir at the time. Lots and lots of Persian translations of Indic religious works, the Upanishads, the Puranas, Ramayana, Mahabharata, etc. Just as an example, the Mahabharata is present in at least 3 iterations in Persian. So in the Persian translation commissioned by Akbar, which was quite a sort of sparse, literal translation, in a sort of more rhetorically ornate Persian expansion of Faizi, and in a sort of final version connected more directly to Kashmir, which was commissioned by Gulab Singh, who was the founder of the Dogra dynasty, which was still ruling when all our figures were in Kashmir. So as I already mentioned, these Persian translations of Indic religious texts seem to be one of the absolutely key interests of Dixon, which informed his collecting practices, as well as picking up various compilations of Persian poetry by Indian and Kashmiri poets. The Dixon collection, as we have it here, is somewhat truncated. There seems to have been a much larger collection which was sort of divided in a very complex process, and where we've been able to track these manuscripts and miniature paintings, so-called, to other institutions, they evince many of the same sort of interests and themes that the material we hold at SOAS has as well. So just in closing, I'd quite like to emphasize that as well as the large bequests from missionaries, colonial bureaucrats, scholars, which make up the kind of mainstay of the SOAS manuscript sequence, South Asians themselves also sold and bequested material to the school from the earliest time, whether alumni or people in possession of manuscripts, etc. So this particular manuscript of Razi's Haft Iklim was acquired from one Kanka Ali Akbar of Bengal in the sort of late 1920s. And I've shown this image, which shows this ink stamp, which shows that it was once part of the palace library of one of the Bengali Nawabs of Murshidabad. And on the next page, I've included some of the details of the ownership stamps which are connected to this princely library in Bengal. The nature of Kankar Ali Akbar's connection to the library is something I'm still trying to puzzle out, but it seems that Wasif Ali Mirza, who was the Nawab at the time of these transfers taking place, would soon, in a year or two, be forced to relinquish control of his estates entirely, having incurred very large debts as part of his sort of playboy lifestyle, essentially. 7 other manuscripts from the Nawab's holdings were acquired for the Victoria Memorial Museum in Calcutta in the 20s. So it's clear that the Nawab had already begun releasing parts of that library in order to defray his debts. And that sort of provides a rationale, I think, for the entrance of this Hafta Qaleem manuscript onto the market. So with that, I'll pass over to Bazine to talk about our sort of mainline library holdings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The SOAS Library's South Asia collections from Ross to the present. The library, since its inception in 1916, has not been merely a storehouse of printed matter, but a living palimpsest of scholarship. Its pages inscribed over a century by the labors of linguists, ethnographers, archivists, and bibliographers. The narrative of this institution unfolds neither in straight lines nor simple chronologies, but in layered constellations. Here, the sediment of imperial knowledge production, there the sedimentation of vernacular textualities. Here, the hand of early 20th century linguistic polymathy, there the touch of digitized 21st century access. South Asia is a modish term which evolved from American officialese to describe what is the Indian subcontinent. There have been academic debates on the geographical expression, but it is not so fraught with contestation as the Near and Middle East. Incidentally, the Indian Foreign Office pointedly eschews preferring to describe its regional division concerned with what is Southwest Asia. Another term, perhaps of lesser frequency, is SAARC countries, with reference to that regional body incorporated from 1985 known as SAARC, South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation. Its last regional summit was in 2014, so that should tell you this part of the world is not any less fraught with historic claims or grievances than the Middle East. But back to the mother country and its imperial metropolis, London. South Asia loomed larger than life in the school's inception. Sir Edward Denison Ross, founding director 1916 to 37, was also its first librarian for good measure. He was, in a word, apposite, having successfully served as professor of Persian at UCL 1896 to 1901, principal of the Calcutta Madrasa 1901 onwards, officer in charge of the records of the Government of India from 1911, keeper of the Stein Antiquities at the British Museum 1914 onwards. And the school's charter accorded representation to the India Office, today the Indian High Commission at Aldwych, until 1948 a distinct department of Whitehall. South Asia, as it appears in the SOAS library, is not merely a geographical locus. It is a confluence of tongues, Sanskrit and Pali besides Persian and Arabic, Tamil and Telugu alongside Hindi, Bengali, Assamese, Urdu, Punjabi, Sinhala, Marathi, Malayalam, Gujarati, Nepalese, and lesser-known tribal tongues. It is a space where religious treatises, land records, missionary grammars, ethnographic albums, and oral history transcribes cohabit. The subcontinent here is archival rather than territorial, shaped and reshaped in the catalogues, stacks, and digital portals of one of the UK's 5 national research libraries. Under Ross's guidance, the library's earliest acquisitions bore the stamp of his own scholarly breadth. One of the earliest bequests to the fledgling library's open stacks was the collection of Persian and Urdu volumes from the library of Professor Sir Thomas Arnold, the first English editor of the Encyclopedia of Islam, sometime instructor at the Mohammedan Anglo-Oriental College, now Aligarh Muslim University, India, and professor of philosophy and dean of the Oriental Faculty, Punjab University, Lahore, now Pakistan. At SOAS, Africa, SOAS was only added to the school's acronym and remit from 1938. Arnold was its first chair of Arabic and Islamic studies, and he was also assistant librarian of the India Office 1904 to 09. Indeed, that government department had its own library and with several avatars and shifts down the decades become amalgamated, as we know now, into the British Library. South Asia was never treated here in isolation at Russell Square. Its collections were from the outset interlinked with the Persianate, the Arabic, the Turkic, the Tibetan and Sinophone worlds, reflecting both the historical entanglements of the subcontinent and Ross's conviction that linguistic and cultural boundaries are porous. Acquisitions from Imperial India included printed Persian court histories, Sanskrit epics in lithographed form, hand-copied Urdu poetry collections, and missionary-published grammars. Ross's contacts, ranging from scholars at Calcutta University to archaeologists such as Sir Aurel Stein, ensured a steady flow of such reproductions into the fledgling library. And Ross's own papers, preserved today in the library's archives and special collections, of which my colleagues have spoken to you, 35 boxes in total, do document this formative period. Empires need administrators and funding. At least so it was implicitly assumed, what with the school, quote, which owed its inception to the action of the government itself, close quote, as noted in its centennial history. The travails of this need not detain us here. But when a deputation of the school was met by mandarins from the India Office, Colonial Office and War Office almost 20 years later in 1938, since its founding, by then there were more than 900 students registered from India itself, out of 1,040 from across the British Empire, and the school's total strength was 7,200. Plus, there were some 281 Indian Civil Service ICS probationers at the school. Not all could be said to study the 24 Indian languages which were offered for instruction and were now part of its burgeoning collection. But at the library did owe much to the bequests of what would in later decades become these old India hands, namely ICS officers, who we find in its scholophones in the open stacks. One pair of hands, ladies and gentlemen, was noticeably absent since fate dictated otherwise. A head girl during the war years at her school in Grantham, Lincolnshire, one Margaret Hilda Roberts was toying with the idea of joining the Indian Civil Service. Mrs. Thatcher, years later, also recounted how her father said that might not be the case by the time she got round to applying, since there would be no civil service to apply. Alderman Roberts was right, for Indianization of the service was already underway, and native recruits were there 1864 onwards, with the last European inductees in that 1942 batch, by which time she was leaving school. And that was 1942, incidentally, which was also the Quit India movement launched by Gandhi in wartime India, well before transfer of power in 1947. But donations also came from elsewhere. When Bombay's Zoroastrian community established funds for the teaching of ancient Iranian languages, the Parsi community lectureship, arguably the first ethnically sponsored varsity initiative in area studies not just in Britain but the West generally, was established at the school in 1929. Around this time, we have considerable donations of titles with a bearing on Zoroastrianism and Parsis, authored by Indian Zoroastrians, in other words Parsis, and quite a few were gifted to the library by Sir Dinshaw Pettit of Bombay. Successive baronets of the Pettit family were all named on assumption of the peerage Sir Dinshaw, regardless of their birth name. And I contend that we owe these titles that we have here to the third namesake Sir Dinshaw, whose sister created a stir in 1920s Bombay by banning a Muslim against her family's wishes, who went on to become the founder of Pakistan, M.A. Jinnah. And today, of course, as you know, is the 70th independence anniversary of Pakistan, 14th August. By now, SOAS's reputation preceded it, and so one finds gifted titles in our open stacks sometime from the mid-1950s of books donated by the government of West Pakistan. A reflection of the times becomes evident too with the change in the nomenclature to the department at the school, where it's now known as the Department of India, Pakistan and Ceylon. East Pakistan seceded in 1971 to become Bangladesh, and we have one of the most exhaustive collection of titles in English and Bengali, especially personal recollections of ordinary citizens, but also short stories, poems and local histories of those caught up in a civil war of genocidal proportions. SOAS Library is also one of the few varsities in the world, never mind British Isles, to hold a modest collection of titles in Zonka, 24 in all, the official language of that Himalayan kingdom, Bhutan, a country which prefers calibrating its well-being not by GDP, gross domestic product, but GNH, gross national happiness, since 1972. We can enumerate, however, only 9 titles in Divehi, the national language of Maldives, that Indian Ocean archipelago, which was the last territory in the subcontinent to become independent in 1965. Ceylon, independent since 1948, became a republic, rechristened as Sri Lanka in 1972. Her late Majesty, it may be recalled, was formally its head of state for some 2 decades, 1952 to 72, and Sri Lanka remained her only realm in South Asia till then as head of state. Our South Asia holdings is a metaphor for the collections themselves, modern and historic, expansive yet structured, cosmopolitan in scope but attentive to regional specificity. To write of the South Asia Library's collections here at SOAS is to write of a century-long dialogue between acquisition and access, curation and interpretation. Thank you very much.